My late wife kept another man's cufflink hidden in her sewing box for almost 20 years. I found it beneath a layer of spare buttons and black thread while cleaning out the hall closet 6 years after Margaret died. The cufflink was cheap silver-colored metal, square-faced, with a tiny engraved pine tree in one corner. I knew exactly who had owned it. My brother-in-law, Thomas Reed. What made my stomach tighten was a bent post on the back and a faint streak of white paint along one edge. I remembered seeing that same cufflink on Thomas at our daughter's graduation party in 2004, the year Margaret and I came closer to separating than anyone in the family knew. My name is Raymond Cole. I was 68 when I found it. I had retired from inspecting commercial fire sprinkler systems around western Michigan, a job that taught me to notice small things people preferred not to notice. The year that cufflink disappeared, Margaret was different. She began taking evening drives alone. She received calls she answered in the laundry room. Once, she returned home after midnight, wearing the same cream blouse she had left in, except there was white paint on the cuff. I asked where she had been. At Denise's, she said. Denise was her sister, Thomas's wife. At the time, I believed her. Finding his cufflink made those old memories rearrange themselves. The sewing box had belonged to Margaret's mother. Margaret kept it on a shelf in our bedroom for decades. I had opened it before, looking for needles or safety pins, and never saw the cufflink. So either she hid it carefully or I had simply never looked beneath the removable tray. I turned it in my hand. The pine tree came from Thomas's old employer, a lumber company near Muskegon. He wore the pair to weddings, graduations, and funerals because they were the closest thing he owned to formal jewelry. I remembered him complaining after the graduation party that one was missing. He blamed the restaurant. Margaret said nothing. Now one of them was sitting in her sewing box. And for the first time since she died, I wondered whether there had been a part of my marriage I had never actually known. Thomas and I had been friends before he married Denise. We met through work in the late 80s. He managed warehouse safety for a building supply company, and I inspected sprinkler systems in several of their facilities. He was easy to like, loud laugh, good memory, the kind of man who remembered which beer you drank after meeting you once. When he started dating Denise, I thought it was perfect. Our families became tangled together in the best way. Cookouts, Christmas mornings, fishing weekends. Then, around 2004, Thomas changed. He stayed at work later. He started dressing better for ordinary weekdays. Denise joked that he had become management material after 30 years. Margaret never laughed. At the time, I assumed she simply did not like the way Thomas sometimes talked over Denise. Looking back, I remembered something else. Margaret began asking me strange questions. If you knew a friend was making a mistake, how much would you tell his wife? I said, depends on the mistake. What if it wasn't illegal? Then probably stay out of it. What if staying out of it hurt somebody? I was tired and irritated. I told her, marriages don't need committees. She stopped asking. The cufflink made that conversation feel less theoretical. I called Denise. She was 70 now and lived outside Grand Rapids. I did not tell her where I found it. I only asked whether Thomas still had his old pine tree cufflinks. She laughed softly. He lost one forever ago. When? Emily's graduation. Emily was my daughter. You're sure? Thomas complained about it for weeks. Did Margaret help look? Another pause. Why are you asking? I told her. Denise did not speak for several seconds. Then she said, Ray, I think you should come over. Her house was smaller than the one she shared with Thomas, who had died 3 years before Margaret. She brought out a photograph album. There, in a picture taken after Emily's graduation dinner, Thomas stood beside Margaret in our driveway. His left cuff showed one pine tree link. The right cuff was empty. Margaret's hand was closed around something. I could not see what. Denise said, that picture was taken at almost 11 at night. I looked at her. The dinner ended at 8. I know. Margaret had told me she went straight to Denise's house afterward. She had not. Denise poured coffee and sat across from me. I should have told you years ago, she said. That phrase never improves a conversation. I asked where Margaret and Thomas had been after graduation dinner. Denise shook her head. I didn't know then. When did you find out? About a month later. She explained that Thomas had been meeting a woman from his office. Her name was Janet Moore. Not an affair, according to Thomas. Lunches at first, then long conversations after work. One dinner he did not tell Denise about. Denise found a restaurant receipt in his truck and confronted him. He admitted he had feelings for Janet. He insisted nothing physical had happened. That mattered to him. Denise said, "At the time, it did not matter much to me." I understood. What did Margaret have to do with it? Denise looked toward the window. Thomas told her before he told me. I felt something in my chest tighten. Why her? He was scared. That answer irritated me. He had me. Denise gave me a tired look. Exactly. Thomas did not come to me because he believed I would judge him immediately. He was right. I had always treated loyalty as a clean line. Cross it, and you were on the other side. Margaret was different. She could be angry with someone and still listen. Thomas asked her how to tell Denise without turning one mistake into the end of his marriage. Margaret told him he had to stop seeing Janet first. He did. Then he delayed telling Denise. That was where Margaret made her first questionable choice. She agreed to give him a week, then another. During that time, Denise sensed something was wrong and called Margaret repeatedly. Margaret listened to her too. She knew both sides. I asked, yes. I stood up. That is not helping. That is lying. Denise did not disagree. The secret meeting after Emily's graduation happened because Thomas finally promised Margaret he would tell Denise that night. Instead, he panicked. They argued in the parking lot behind a clothes paint store near our house. Thomas caught his cuff on a metal fence. The post bent. The cufflink came off. Margaret picked it up. The white streak was from the painted fence. That was how the cufflink reached her hand. She really had met Thomas secretly. And she deliberately lied to me about where she had been. I drove home feeling something I did not expect. Relief and anger can exist together. I was relieved Margaret had not been having an affair. I was furious that she had been involved in someone else's. Not physically. But she had carried information between two people while telling each of them less than the truth, and she had excluded me completely. The next morning, I went through Margaret's old calendar from 2004. Most entries were ordinary. Dentist. Emily home. Church supper. Then I found 3 Thursdays marked only tea. Thomas. One of those Thursdays matched the night Margaret told me she was helping Denise shop for curtains. I found a folded page in the back of the calendar. Margaret had written, Thomas wants one more week. Denise knows enough to feel crazy. Ray will push too hard if I tell him now. That sentence stopped me. I had not merely been left out. I had been judged in advance. I called Denise again. What happened after the parking lot? Thomas told me. That night. The next morning, they separated for several weeks. Thomas stayed with a coworker. Denise began counseling alone. Eventually, they went together. Their marriage survived, but it changed. She said trust returned slowly and never completely. Thomas left the lumber company the following year. He and Janet never resumed contact. As far as Denise knew, did Margaret keep seeing him? Not alone. Did she apologize to you? Yes. For hiding it? Yes. Did you forgive her? Denise thought about that. Mostly. I wanted a sharper answer. She took his side. No, Denise said. That was part of the problem. She thought she could keep both sides safe. That sounded like Margaret. She hated forcing people into decisions. She also hated admitting that refusing to choose can become a choice of its own. I asked why the cufflink was never returned. Denise said she assumed Thomas lost it. Thomas apparently did too. Margaret never mentioned having it. That still did not fit. If the cufflink had simply fallen into her purse, she could have returned it after the crisis ended. Instead, she hid it in her sewing box for nearly 20 years. and the bent post had been straightened slightly, not repaired correctly, just bent back enough that it almost looked wearable. Margaret had done something to it after that night. The cufflink had not merely been forgotten. I knew the white paint might tell me where the argument happened. The paint store was long gone, but Thomas had once shown me the back lot when we were considering repainting my garage. I drove there. The building was now a flooring showroom. The old metal fence remained along one side. Most of it had been repainted black. One section behind the dumpster still showed the original white. That did not add much. Then the owner mentioned the fence used to separate the store from a small union hall next door. I remembered the hall. Thomas's company held safety meetings there. So did my sprinkler inspection union. I went home and checked my own work notebooks. I still had them because retirement had not cured me of saving paperwork. On the date of Margaret and Thomas's secret meeting, I had written, called T about warehouse incident, told him I'd back him if management blames him. I had forgotten that completely. The warehouse incident came back slowly. A new forklift driver had damaged a sprinkler riser at Thomas's facility. Water flooded part of the warehouse. Management wanted someone responsible. Thomas had approved a temporary storage arrangement that narrowed the driving lane. Technically allowed. Practically stupid. He feared the company might fire him. I told him, if they come after you, I'll tell them to lay out past inspection. That was true. I had signed the inspection, but I had warned Thomas the lane was too tight. He ignored me. Still, when pressure came, I protected him. That had always been our arrangement. Thomas and I defended each other publicly, criticized each other privately. Margaret hated it. I found another note in her calendar. Ray promised Thomas he'd stand with him again. Now Thomas thinks Ray has earned the right to see him as better than he is. That sentence made me angry because I understood it. Thomas had gone to Margaret instead of me about Janet partly because my loyalty had become a trap. He knew if he told me, I would either defend him completely or reject him completely. Margaret believed neither would help Denise. But why keep the cufflink? I examined the bent post under a magnifying lamp. Wrapped tightly around the base was a tiny strand of dark blue thread, the same shade Margaret used for years to mend the inside pockets of my work jackets. She had deliberately worked on the cufflink. That thread gave me my next clue. Margaret kept sewing supplies in color-coded envelopes. Blue thread was for work clothes. I found an old envelope labeled Raymond jackets. Inside was a scrap of fabric and a note in her handwriting. Fix Tom's link with raised thread. Couldn't make it hold. Maybe that's fitting. Underneath, she had written a date 2 days after the secret meeting. Then one more line. Talk to Helen. She says I'm protecting Ray from himself again. Helen was Margaret's closest friend from nursing school. She was still alive and living near Kalamazoo. When I called, she remembered the cufflink. I told Maggie to throw it away. Why didn't she? She said she couldn't. I asked why. Helen sighed. Because it was about you by then. That was not what I wanted to hear. Margaret had told Helen about Thomas, Janet, and Denise. She also told her about my promise to protect Thomas at work. She thought if she told you about Janet right then, you would do one of two things, Helen said. You confront him and blow up his marriage before he talked to Denise, or you defend him because you had just promised to stand by him over the warehouse issue. I could have handled 2 separate problems. Maybe. The doubt in her voice irritated me. Then she reminded me of something else. My father had stopped speaking to his own brother for nearly 15 years after learning he had cheated on his wife. I admired my father for it. I used to tell that story as proof that principles mattered more than blood. Margaret had heard it many times. Thomas had too. Suddenly the secret looked different. Margaret was not only protecting Thomas. She was protecting my relationship with him from a version of me she believed would make an irreversible decision in anger. That was insulting. It was also believable. Helen said Margaret planned to tell me after Thomas and Denise began counseling. Then something happened. Thomas came to our house. I was in the garage. He and I talked for almost an hour. I remember the conversation. Thomas said his marriage was going through something. I told him, Whatever it is, don't let pride cost you your family. He nearly confessed. Margaret was listening from the kitchen, and I gave her a new reason to remain silent. I called Denise. Did Thomas tell you about the conversation in my garage? Yes. What did he say? That he almost told you everything. Why didn't he? Because you said something else. I remembered only after she repeated it. I told Thomas, I don't want details. If you did something wrong, fix it at home. Don't make me referee your marriage. At the time, I thought that was mature. Boundaries. I had no idea he was standing there carrying exactly the truth I was refusing to hear. Margaret took my words literally. So did Thomas. That was the second truth. She had not simply decided I was too judgmental to trust. I had explicitly told Thomas not to involve me in the details of his marriage. I did not know what the details were, but Margaret believed honoring that boundary gave Denise and Thomas room to decide their future without my influence. The problem was that she went further. She also hid her own involvement. She lied about where she had been. She let me spend years thinking Thomas and Denise's troubles were mostly about communication. She protected their privacy by rewriting part of my marriage too. Helen told me Margaret struggled with that. The cufflink became the object she could not resolve. 2 days after parking lot argument, she tried to straighten the bent post with needle-nose pliers from her sewing box. It snapped partway. She wrapped the base with blue thread, trying to stabilize it. It would not hold. She considered returning it anyway. Then Thomas told her to keep it. Why? I asked. Helen said he told her it was the price of asking her to carry something she shouldn't have had to carry. That sounded dramatic for Thomas. It also sounded like guilt. Margaret kept the cufflink because returning it to Thomas felt like pretending nothing had happened. Giving it to Denise felt cruel. Showing it to me required the explanation she had promised not to give, so it stayed in the sewing box for almost 20 years. A small broken thing nobody could decide who owned anymore. I spoke to Thomas's son, Kevin, after Denise suggested it. He was 45 and had known about his parents' crisis since college. Not every detail. Enough. He remembered Margaret differently than I did during that year. She was around a lot, he said. At your house. Yeah, Mom was a mess. That stung. While I believe Margaret was attending church meetings and helping her sister, she had been sitting with Denise after Thomas moved out. Kevin did not make her sound noble. Sometimes Margaret pushed Denise too hard to consider counseling. Sometimes she defended Thomas when Denise wanted only anger. Once, Denise told her to go home. That mattered to me. Margaret had not possessed some perfect wisdom. She made mistakes. She took on a role she had no clean right to take. But Kevin remembered something else. After his parents reconciled, Margaret stopped coming over unless invited. She knew she crossed into our marriage too far. I asked whether Thomas and Denise were happy afterward. Kevin laughed softly. Depend what you mean. They stayed married until Thomas died. They traveled. They argued. They never became the couple they had been before 2004. Maybe no couple does. Kevin said his father became quieter after the affair scare. More honest, but less sure of himself. Denise became less trusting, but also less willing to pretend. Their marriage survived by becoming a different marriage. That reminded me of the cufflink, the bent post, the blue thread. Margaret tried to repair it, but could not return it to its original strength. She left the white paint on the edge. She never polished away the mark from the night Thomas finally stopped delaying the truth. I asked Denise if she wanted the cufflink. She took a long time to answer. No. Why? Because it isn't mine. It belonged to your husband. No, it belonged to the mess he made. That sentence settled something in me. I had spent weeks deciding whether Margaret's secrecy meant I knew her less than I thought. The answer was yes, but not in the way I feared. She had never betrayed me romantically. She had betrayed my expectation that marriage meant I was entitled to every truth that touched our lives. I still believed I deserved more than she gave me. Now I also understood the impossible position she had helped create. I did not throw the cufflink away. For a while, I kept it on my desk. Then I took it to a small jeweler near Grand Haven. I asked whether the post could be repaired. The jeweler examined the blue thread. "Do you want to remove this?" I said no. He looked at me strangely. "It won't be a clean repair." "That's fine." He reinforced the post without cutting away Margaret's thread. The cufflink works now. Not perfectly. The backing sits slightly crooked. I gave it to Kevin. He held it under the light and rubbed the white paint mark with his thumb. "Dad's." "Yes." "Where was it?" I told him. Not every detail. "Enough." He smiled when I explained the thread. "My mother would hate that you fixed it." "Why?" "She'd say some things should stay broken. Your mother said she didn't want it." That sounds like her too. Kevin kept the cufflink. He did not have the matching one. Nobody knew what happened to it. That felt appropriate. I kept a photograph of the repaired cufflink before giving it away. It sits in Margaret's sewing box now, beneath the same tray where I found the original. At first, that little square of metal made me wonder whether my wife had loved another man. Then it made me angry because she had kept another couple's truth from me. Neither feeling was entirely wrong. Margaret did lie. She decided what I was allowed to know. She underestimated my right to make my own choices. I wish I could tell her that. I also wish I could tell her I understand what frightened her. Back then, I made loyalty sound simple. Stand by your people. Condemn betrayal. Never become neutral when somebody you love gets hurt. Those rules worked well until everyone involved was someone I loved. Margaret saw that problem before I did. She handled it imperfectly. So what I have? The detail I remember most now is not the pine tree engraved on the front. It is the dark blue thread wrapped around the bent post. That thread came from the spool Margaret used to repair my work jackets. For years, she fixed the tears I brought home without making much of them. On Thomas's cufflink, the same thread failed to hide the damage. It only kept the broken part from separating completely. Maybe that was the best she could do with all of us that year. I still wish she had trusted me with the truth. But I no longer confuse wishing she had chosen differently with believing she did not love me.